So a very good afternoon to all distinguished guests who are present here. So without taking much time, I would like to call our eminent speaker. Uh, she was Dr. Sada Farid. She is the assistant professor in English department at Women's College, Aligarh Muslim University, India. Presently, she is translating a collection of short stories from Hindi to Urdu. Besides that, she has 3 books to her credit, and these are The Parsi Diaspora, Expatriate Experience and Nostalgic Discourse, and Literacy Criticism. She has been a part of the SWAYAM and ARPIT programs of the Ministry of Human Resource Development. She had also worked at Salman bin Abdulaziz University, now Prince Satam bin Abdulaziz University. She has been associated with IGNU as an academic counselor for past 4 years. She is also an active member of literary committee in the Women's College and has several national and international publications to her credit, and as has been an active participation in various seminars and conferences to repute. She part of editorial board of VSRD, technical and non-technical journal, and a member of the international journal, The Literary Voice. So ma'am, you can proceed now.
Thank you so much, Roderick, for such a generous introduction of mine. I welcome all the participants of this session, and I thank all the details regarding the time and everything. You all know, and you have been informed already about those things. So let's start this session without wasting the time. We can call the first participant. I think she is Evangeline.
Yes, ma'am. Sure.
Yeah, you're very welcome here.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. The paper I'll be presenting today is all analyzing the genesis of the Khasi tribe through the origin myth. Now, when we talk about the origin myth, the origin myth is a story-making impulse of man. Myths are stories of the hidden mysteries of life and the attempts to probe into the inner life of the universe. Now, myths have their own value in the attempt of the human mind in a very primitive, a very unscientific age to explain the various causes of nature. Now, the Carl Jung believed that myths and dreams were the expressions of the collective consciousness, in that they express the core ideas that are part of the human species as a whole. Creation myths exist and they form a very integral part of every culture. The roots of religion and folklore puts forward the idea that what modern man thinks to be baseless and superstitious holds an entire belief system and facts for the tribal communities like the Khasis. Now, the Khasi Jaintia hills of the central and eastern Meghalaya plateau is inhabited by the Khasi Kunar community, who in their folk tradition called themselves the children of the Hyutrep Nyotkum. The Khanatang or the sanctified stories include the myth of the Hinyotrep or the 7 huts, the 7 families, who became the ancestors of the Khasi people. And here I've given the map of the different tribes, the Khunriam, the Kunar, Bhoy, War, Maram, Lingam, and the Dikhu. Now, the origin myth is a symbolic, a sacred narrative concerning the origins of the world as conceptually constructed by the Khasis, which not only links the people to their ancestors, but in a way helps them to identify with their origin and thus claim an identity. Now, I won't go into the details of the actual story, but the creation myth of the Khasis actually goes like this. Beginning of time, there was nothing on earth. God, who was called Umble Nongbo Nongta, or God the Creator, created the Ramo. Ramo basically is the guardian spirit of earth and her husband. Now, it is natural that myth makers the world over, in their attempt to tell the story of birth or creation, have consciously or either unconsciously reached out to the process of mammalian birth for imagery and metaphor. It is natural that the symbols and the images of the feminine play a primary role in this myth. So Ramo basically plays the central part. Now, after that, he granted Ramo, or the guardian spirit of earth, 5 children: the sun, the moon, water, wind, and fire. Then after this, Ramo pleaded to God for wise and wise overseers who would. I cannot change this. Okay, God basically. Ramo pleaded with God to grant her overseers who would be a blessing to life on earth. So God, who is benevolent and kind, granted her wish, and it was decided that 16 clans living in heaven would be the fitting caretakers of earth. So God summoned the divine Darbar to elect the future guardians of earth. And after a great deal of deliberation, God decided that 7 of the 16 clans living in heaven would ascend to earth to till the land and to rule and to govern. So these became the Himnothrep Noskum, or the 7 huts, the 7 families. Now, through the children of Ramo, God made a covenant with the 7 clans. As a token of that covenant, he declared that the 7 clans should adhere to the 3 basic principles of Katibriu Tible, which means to know man and to know God. Katipkur Tipkha, that means to know one's maternal and paternal relations, and Kamaika Hok. So here you have the picture of Lom Sopet Bining. And it has been said that Lom Sopet Bining, there was a ladder called the Golden Ladder, Jinking Xiar. Okay, and Sopet Bining, when you translate it, it means the mount of heaven's navel. Now, apart from this, perhaps as in the case of other creation myths in the world, it is not in man to be content with happiness alone. Like everything else, he is essentially a double-edged sword, capable of good and evil. So he began to question the dictates of God. He wanted to determine his own life independently, and he strayed from the 3 covenants. So greed, power sat supreme in his heart. And because of that, God, who was Ublay Unongbo Unongta, was greatly vexed by man's rebelliousness. He was deeply aggrieved, and he decided to break off ties with man and close the golden ladder to heaven forever. Away from the remaining 9 clans in heaven and bereft of God's guidance and blessings, the 7 clans remained helpless orphans on earth. Thus, the golden age has ended. So these are pictures of the Lom Sopet Bining. Now, God, when we interpret this particular story, God, humankind, nature are the principal actors in this story that deals with the elemental forces of good and evil, the idyllic and its subsequent loss thereof. The eroding powers of evil and destruction circumvent the good that was cut off from God, the creator. The common epithets used repeatedly to describe the personality of God, the Khasi finds himself in a state of exile. Now, the coming of the 7 huts from the heavenly abode through the golden ladder, this at best can be seen as an etiological account to indicate that the Khasis believe in divine origin. Now, as the Khasi struggles to lay the foundations of a new relationship with the universe and with God, his priorities shift several degrees away to an earthbound existence, founded upon the emerging principles of a new social order that must perforce attempt to be a copy of the perfection of heaven in heaven. So here you have the gateway to the Lom Sopet Bining, which was called the cradle of human Khasi civilization. Now, again, before I conclude, I would just like to tell you about something very interesting that happened recently in 2011. Archaeological evidence discovered by Marco Mitri, who's a well-known archaeologist. He found burial kits, cremation mounds, iron smelting area, which was found near Lom Sopet Bining. So all this points to the fact that Lom Sopet Bining holds within it the key to unlocking the secrets to understanding the Khasis as a people. The archaeological findings seems to suggest that the entire folk story is a compressed narration of the transformation that was going on in the society that flourished around that particular area. A synthesis of the different data suggests that there's a distinct cultural identity was taking shape. The folk narrative can be looked at as an embedded account of such accomplishment achieved by the earliest settlers who managed to control and to tame the hills. The Lom Sopet Bining landscape continues to survive in the people's memory as a cradle of their culture and the ancestral home of the people. Sopet Bining today is a symbol of identity to the intellectuals and sacred to the masses. So, in conclusion, the origin myth of the Khasi is a classic informant of the orality that has sustained a society whose consciousness is inherently oral, and though on the surface seems to have moved beyond its oral moorings, is still bound to the oral continuum that has perforce maintained its identity.
Next, we will have Dr. D. Regan Prabhavaran. If he is here, he will present it now. And the title of the paper is Relationships and Attachment Patterns in the Selective Novels of Annie Tyler and Karen Kingsbury. So if you are now here, you can present it now.
America has many times been called the land of dreams. Success in the cine industry and the success stories of hardworking men and women has lifted the country to great heights and many a time left wondrous results for the youth to think about. The rise in multicultural settings ushers people from all across the globe to impact American culture and live the American dream. However, life for its people has not been easy. The novels of some writers like Anne Tyler and Karen Kingsbury provide significant insight on relationships and attachment patterns where life in the family sphere has proved to be difficult. Tyler's and Kingsbury's novels are reminiscent of families who struggle in their relationships with their immediate family members. This dissertation, titled Perspectives on Relationships and Attachment Patterns in the Select Novels of Anne Tyler and Karen Kingsbury, is aimed at providing significant details on relationships and attachment patterns in the context of the family. The cultural background of these two novelists is varied. The writer Tyler's upbringing in the Quaker family, where she identifies herself as a stranger, is brought into the context of creating characters equipped with exclusive behaviors. So, there are so many things about this particular writer. And there's another writer, as I was saying, her name is Karen Kingsbury. Her novels allow readers to connect with them quite easily. And having been born in a traditional family, she had strongly believed that her upbringing was the only way. But her husband's faith in God completely changed her. The themes in her novels are determined by their ability to allow readers to reconnect with their loved ones. In doing so, they encounter certain levels of emotions and register their feelings in the mind banks to replay them again and again. And the ultimatum declared is that these two novelists, Anne Tyler and Karen Kingsbury, write about powers that they meticulously conjure in their tales, and it is the power of inherent bonds. So, the silent plight of children, parents, spouses who suffer under the weight of failed relationships in the family is quite evident in these novels, in these books by these two writers. And the books by Karen Kingsbury are insistent on faith based themes like forgiveness and hope, which play a major role. So, with these two aspects, forgiveness and hope, there is the aspect of learning to forgive brothers or siblings who have stolen their girlfriends or like that. That is what is in one of her novels, Kingsbury's novels. The aspect to forgive, to come to compromise and not harm the sibling in any way, so that there is good relationship in the family. And by learning from their mistakes and to find a successful strategy in the strengths of their good relationships. So, searching for a life partner by dating members of the opposite sex is a universal phenomenon. The process of finding a suitable partner can be very exhausting when neither one of the partners are insistent on long-term commitment vows. So, this is the beginning of trouble in life. And some parents give away their children for adoption and to their own wills and fancies, to their dreams, because the child is very much stubborn about it. And the mother, she suffers a great deal because her children want to do it their own way. But if there is a kind of good faith in the family member, the parents and the children bonding and having good relationship and listening to the parents, if that aspect is there, they will have support in the society. They will have many opportunities in their country, because that kind of marriage where the parent accepts, that is the one that truly gives pride to them. It gives them quite good satisfaction, happiness, financial stability, satisfaction and happiness, joy, and these good elements, forgiveness and hope, is practiced and can be easily taught to the children, and any issue can be communicated to the parent and they can do the problem solving, and it is most respectful and dignified. There is no kind of humiliation or stress or tension, nothing like that, because the marriage has been accepted, the partner has been accepted by the parents. Both families are in a very good relationship. So there is quite good support for this kind of couple in the society. They can find good jobs, they are respected in their workplace, they are respected in their home, society, functions, everywhere. And even if they have no children or they suffer some kind of distress in their relationship, they are respected because of their choice in obeying their parents. So this is a very good aspect, and this must be considered in this present day, because it's a long-term relationship and parents need children, children need parents. And when we respect and honor our parents, we receive comfort, because relationships can be stressful, and if there is a kind of bitterness or sadness, the only comfort in our heart will be that, oh, I obeyed my parents, I obeyed my mother, I obeyed my father and listened and married according to their choice. So that kind of comfort will be in our hearts, and it will help us to develop a relationship with our spouse. So this is the aspect that I would like to tell in this seminar, in this presentation of mine. There is more to tell in my dissertation, but this aspect alone I would like to tell you and conclude because of the lack of time, and I think this is sufficient. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am, for the wonderful speech. So now I would like to call S. Shiva Kumari and Dr. T. Manasan. So, what of the person now?
Good afternoon to all.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Is it audible?
Yes, ma'am, you're audible.
Just a minute. Can you see the slides now?
Yes, ma'am, you can see it.
Okay. So good afternoon to all. First of all, let me introduce myself. I am Mrs. S. Shiba Kumari. I am research scholar of Chicken College, Erode, affiliated to Bharatiyar University. My topic is cultural hegemony in Mahesh Dattani's Final Solutions. So before going deep into my play, that is Mahesh Dattani's play Final Solution, I would like to depict something about culture, hegemony, and then cultural hegemony. So first, it's about culture. So as we all know, India is a country that boasts of rich culture. History of India's culture is several millennium old. Indian culture has been an inspiration to many writers. Indian culture is characterized by a strict social hierarchy. So culture is the ideational aspects of social life that we live, experience, and observe. So not only the life we live and experience, but also we observe, that is also culture. So it embraces customs, rituals, ceremonies, values, knowledge, ideas, morals, languages, symbols, and images. Now moving on to this hegemony part. Hegemony derives from the Greek term hegemonia. So that means dominance over. So domination of one group over another. Dominant groups implants their ideas. Yes, we know that if a person is dominant, he oppresses the another person. So he implants their own ideas. So dominant groups take advantage for them over the oppressed group. Now, cultural hegemony. So this is a term given by Antonio Gramsci. So domination extends in the aspects of politics, religion, the ideology, then embedded into the culture of the society. So this sort of situation, we call it as the term cultural hegemony. So cultural hegemony frames the world view of the ruling class. This kind of power is actually ruled by force. It is ruled by the dominant group. This concept, developed by Antonio Gramsci, is an Italian philosopher. And Gramsci developed this concept of cultural hegemony in an effort to explain the dominance of capitalism and its exploitation of workers. So, actually, this lies under Marxist theory. So when we speak of Marxist theory of capitalism, is premised on the exploitation of the working class by the ruling class. So Marx reasoned that workers would rise up and overthrow the ruling class. So capitalist exploits the working class, that creates conflict. So India is of varied heritage and culture. Yes, we know India is blended with diverse ethnicities, customs, traditions, and religious, and it's portray an inimitable image of the nation. God is worshipped and addressed differently in all the religions. Yes, in India, we follow so much of religion, but the destination lead us to the God. The path leads us only one place, that is God. But we address and worship the God in different way. And the world we live, it shows the path that is God, but the world we live, that is with imperfections, saddened with imperfections. And it has various sorts of evils and misfortunes. So we, the stakeholders, found complaining and winning against everything that we have to put up with. So if we live the world in this situation, then it results in violence, that we know. So violence, the major conflict arise in India between Hindus and Muslims, which has spilled over into violence. Communal rioting numerous times happened in India. Example, I can mention two atrocities, that is destruction of Babri Masjid Mosque in Ayodhya in 1922, that is, the demolition of the Babri Masjid was illegally carried out by a large group of activists in the city of Ayodhya. The demolition resulted in several months of intercommunal rioting between Hindu and Muslim communities, causing the death of more than 2,000 people. And another one atrocity I can mention, that is 2002 massacres in Gujarat. The 2002 Gujarat riots was a 3-day period of intercommunal violence in Gujarat. The burning of a train in Godhra caused 58 pilgrims in death. Following the initial riot incidents, there were further outbreaks of violence for 3 months and violence against the minority Muslim of Gujarat for the next 1 year. So these happened, and about the writer I have chosen, Mahesh Dattani. He's a modern English playwright who has successfully staged his plays in India and abroad. He has won the Sahitya Academic Award for his play Final Solutions in the year 1998. All his plays, he has tried to bring the different aspects of Indian culture and class conflict. As I already said, Indian culture has been an inspiration to many writers. Yes, for Mahesh Dattani to handle the Indian culture in different aspects. So now we are going into the play, The Final Solutions. It is a serious, delicate drama on the subject of cultural hegemony. So it's first staged in Bangalore in 1993, focusing on the problem of cultural hegemony between the Hindus and Muslims in India. Depicts the problems of how the minority community suffer in the hands of majority community. So it resulted in communal riots and culminated disruption of normal social life. So, is it audible? Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, you
ma'am,
are very much
audible.
clearly audible.
Okay, thank you, ma'am, thank you. So the chorus chanting at the back sometimes assumes Hindu mass and sometimes Muslim ones. So here the words I have given rendered by the chorus, and these the clear indicators of the communal disharmony. They hunt us down, they are afraid of us, they beat us up, we are few but we are strong. They beat us up, they are afraid of us, they hunt us down, they want to throw us out. So here it symbolizes the hatred of each and every individual. And now we can go into the sum up of the story, that is the family given there. So the Final Solution play, the scenes takes place inside and outside of Ramnik Gandhi's house. This is a traditional Hindu family. And here, 2 Muslim men, Javed and Bobby, seek refuge in their home during communal riot. So it's a traditional Hindu family. So this Gandhi family comprises of Ramnik and his religious wife Aruna, his mother Hartika, and his daughter Smita. And the head of the family, Hartika, has a strong hatred for the Muslims because her father was killed by the minority people in her hometown of Husainabad, which became part of Pakistan during the partition. So she protests against her son when he gives refuge to 2 Muslim boys. So Hartika, she shuttles between her 2 identities, a girl of 15, Daksha, and a mature lady, Hartika. So Hartika symbolizes the present, whereas Daksha symbolizes the past. So her friendship with Sarain even gets rejected because of this communal rights. And Hartika's father-in-law raised Sarain's father's shop. That is, they set fire in Sarain's father's shop. So when Hartika is alone with the Muslim boys, she asks them to leave India and go to Pakistan. So Hartika's behavior is an expression of her superiority over Muslims. And Ramnik. Ramnik is the son of Hartika. He's a liberal-minded person. He doesn't support his mother towards Muslim because he knew the truth that which his mother is unaware of. Kartika did not know the truth that his father-in-law and husband set fire in Sarain's father's shop. He proves himself to be a secularist. And now Aruna. Aruna represents the second generation, and she is a typical Indian housewife who is busy doing puja. She believes in the supremacy of Hindu religion over all other religions. She doesn't like to compromise with anything that is related to her God. She strongly dislikes the decision of her husband, the decision of allowing the Muslim boys to stay with them under the same roof. When Javed tries to help her out by filling up the drinking water, she clearly says, "We don't allow anyone to fill our drinking water, no outsiders. We bathe our God with it. It has to be pure. It must not be contaminated." So she clearly tells that outsiders are not allowed to fetch or fill water in their house. Then Smita represents the third generation. She doesn't like to adhere to her mother's narrow religious views and customs. The modern education she has received has taught her to be individualistic, rebellious, and rational in her attitude. So she is leading a life of suffocation under the strict of her mother. She sacrificed her individuality because of her mother's happiness. So she conveys her feelings, stating, "Don't please, mommy. Don't try so hard. You are breaking me. I can't bear it. Please don't burden me anymore. I can't take it." So she gets tired of her mother's prejudices. Then Javed. Javed is a Muslim boy in the play. He is sent to Mohalla Street for murdering the pujari of the Rath Yatra. Javed moves towards the pujari. It is his responsibility to kill pujari, but he fails to do so. And the knife fell down and it results in communal rights. And Bobby, a close friend of Javed, saves him and get him into Ramnik house, that is a Hindu traditional family. He controls over his temper and doesn't react angrily. He proclaims, and here I can say, I'm going to conclude this, Bobby performs the central action of the play. And the play reaches its climax when Bobby enters the family puja room and picks up the image of Krishna to Aruna's great distress. So here he proclaims saying that, "See, I am touching God, your God. My flesh is holding him. He does not burn me to words. He does not cry out from the heavens saying, he has been contaminated." Yes, it's true. Bobby performs the central action of the play. So here I would like to conclude. So if people become liberal-minded like Ramnik, Bobby, and Smita, the evil of hegemony will be wiped out from the minds of the people. And then unconventional acts of Javed, Bobby, and Smita shows that the present generation that we will enjoy the new freedom. And I profess that we should inherit love as a substitute of hatred, understanding in the place of misunderstanding, equality instead of inequality, humanity rather than inhumanity to sort out cultural hegemony. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your lecture. It was very impressive. So now I would like to call Shilpa Ravindranan, and will present the paper "Fabricated Realities in Some of the Athenians' Legends and its Reception as Translated Memories in the Present."
Hello,
So,
sir. Am I
ma'am, you can
audible?
proceed now.
Okay. Am I
Yes,
audible,
ma'am, you
sir?
are audible.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, I'm Shilpa Ravindran. I'm a research scholar at the English and Foreign Languages University. The title of my paper is "Fabricated Realities in Some of the Theyyam Legends and its Reception as Translated Memories in the Present." Memory, as we know, has the potential to fabricate a present, taking cues and materials from the past. and performances, especially folk performances rooted in social and cultural past, also serve the same purpose by inducing memory in the present through the act of intersemiotically translating it. Teyyam, a performative art form native to the northern parts of Kerala, the Malabar, could be deliberated to understand the same. However, the experience of the past, flaunted in the form of performances, need not be unerring owing to the nature of the legends. Teyyam has long been considered the voice of the downtrodden, but the voice wasn't rooted in the past societal reality. The downtrodden or underprivileged within the caste system had no means to express their dissent except for these performances. When these performances are done today, the viewers, spectators are taken back to the memory of the times when life was arduous for those belonging to the lower strata within the bygone social system. Yet they are comforted by the alternate reality presented as a memory through the performance. I would like to explain this very concept with the example of Teyyam performances. So before getting into the social issues addressed in the Teyyam performances, let's understand the history of caste system in India. The caste-based oppression prevalent in India till date has its roots in the ancient Indian society and its scriptures which divided people on the basis of their karma and dharma. The notion of purity based on descent had fashioned a society with four prominent varnas: Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras, keeping aside the Dalits or the untouchables and women. The ancient scripture on the societal law and human conduct, the Manusmriti, defends the caste system by acknowledging it as the reason for the lawfulness and regularity in society. The Brahmins, teachers and priests by profession, occupied the top place at the caste hierarchy owing to the belief that they were born from the head of Lord Brahma. Kshatriyas, the rulers and warriors, were believed to be born from the arms of Lord Brahma. Vaishyas, the merchant class, were believed to be born from the thighs of Lord Brahma, and Shudras, the working class, were believed to be born from the feet of Lord Brahma. The Dalits, or the untouchable, constituted the fifth class and were not considered a part of the social system. According to a few historians, Brahmanization took hold of Kerala from the 5th century onwards. Though it tried to engulf the whole of Kerala during the period, many factors resisted it vehemently. Unlike in the north, people in the south, or Kerala in particular, were less gullible to these changes. They lived a life convenient to them and were not ready to get suppressed by force. Thus, the process of Brahmanization in Kerala was rather gradual and took its due time. Many strategies were adopted in this course of time, and the notable one among them was the introduction of Aryan gods to the native people. Many temples were constructed under the patronage of the then rulers of Kerala, the Kulashekharas. Slowly and steadily, they got hold of the land and then was born the caste system. The caste system or the caste hierarchy that took shape in Kerala during the time was different from the fourfold system that existed in the northern parts of India. In Kerala, the Brahmins or the Nambudiris, as they had called themselves, formed the priestly class, and all the remaining natives came under the Shudra or the untouchable bracket. With time, the oppression of the so-called lower caste by the upper caste escalated to a much higher degree. Having discussed the history of caste system, let's move on to discuss its depiction through the medium of theatre performances. Since the Roman age, theatre had been used as a tool to express and promulgate social, political, and cultural ideas or propaganda. Theatre was also an agency for social activism against oppression. Folklore or theatre has done the same. Folklore and folk theatre these days have evolved in terms of style, but some of them still stick on to the dialogues from the past. The performances or the Theyyam performances could be seen as a memory device intended to bring back memories of the past. Through these performances, the past is being recreated. Theyyam is one such folk art, and Theyyam performances could be hence called a translation of the past in an intersemiotic format. These performances, with their music, dance, elaborate makeup, and costumes, reiterate the evils of the bygone society, but the accuracy of the translation of the past reality is contestable. Teyyam or Teyatam is one of the most popular and magnificent ritualistic performative art forms of the northern Kerala, predominantly alluded to the traditional Kolotanadu of the present Kasargod or Kannur district of Kerala. As a living cult with centuries-old rituals, traditions, and customs, it encapsulates almost all classes and castes of Hindu religion. The term Teyyam has its etymology in the word Deivam or God. It is a rare amalgamation of dance and music and portrays important features of the tribal culture. It portrays the belief of the ancient tribes of Kerala who have a lot of importance to who gave a lot of importance to the worship of heroes, mostly the spirits of their ancestors. The majestic dance is accentuated with the chorus of musical instruments such as Elatalam, Vikuchenda, Chenda, and Kuramkural. There are about 400 separate themes, of which around 200 are performed today, each with its own legend and style of performance. Totem Pattagal are the songs that tell the story of the deities performed as Theyyams. Art has always been a mirror to the society. Each art form carries with itself umpteen number of stories, stories that are cultural, social, and political. The performative art form Theyyam is no different in this regard. Some Theyyam performances, through their legends, tend to attack the caste system prevalent a few centuries back in Kerala, especially in the northern Malabar, and are performed by the artists from the so-called untouchable caste groups. However, they fail to present the exact picture, either intentionally or unintentionally, and in turn affect the interpretation of the past by the audience. This could be better understood through the examples of Pottan Theyyam, Kuttichatan Theyyam, Vishnumurti Theyyam, and Manakkatamma Theyyam. Let's understand the legend of these Theyyams first. The legend of Pottan Theyyam. Sri Shankaracharya, the exponent of Advaita Vedanta, was on his way to the Sarvajna Peetham, believed to be the throne of wisdom, when Lord Shiva, Goddess Parvati, and their minister Nandikeshan appeared in front of them disguised as Pulapottan, Pulachamundi, and Pulamarudan respectively to test Shankaracharya's knowledge and integrity. Shankaracharya, oblivious to the fact that they were God themselves, took them for untouchables and asked them to move away from his path in the fear of being polluted. Pottan, who according to the legend is Lord Shiva in disguise, takes this opportunity to put forward his views on caste system and engages in a series of dialogues with Shankaracharya on the evils of the system. The legend is brought to a close with Shankaracharya's enlightenment and his changed attitude towards the caste system that had fragmented the then society. This is the legend of Pottantheyam. Now let's move on to the legend of Kuttichattantheyam. As per the legend, Kuttichatan was born to Lord Shiva but was raised by a childless couple, Kalakada Nambudiri and his wife. Kuttichatan did not abide by the rules and conduct of the Nambudiri class. He was rebellious in nature and showcased resistance. Once he drank the blood of a bull to quench his thirst, going against the caste he was raised in. In the fear of Kuttichatan's deed, his father kills him only to be haunted later. He was soon venerated as a deity to be performed as Theyyam. That was the legend of Kuttichatan Theyyam. Now, the legend of Vishnumurti Theyyam. Palandai Kannan was from the lower caste and he worked for the Kuruvata Nayar. One day, Kannan dared to pluck mangoes from the tree standing on Nayar's yard, which in turn infuriates the latter. Kuruvata Nayar instructed his men to kill Kannan for having severed the caste boundaries. However, Kannan manages to escape the village but soon returns and gets murdered by Nayar's men. Kannan's blood reddens the pond in which he was killed, and a sword emanates out of the water to slay Kuruvata Nayar and destroy his entire clan. Nayar is an upper caste in Kerala. The spirit of Palandai Kannan is later appeased and he was since worshipped and performed as Vishnumurti Theyyam. Now, the legend of Manakota Amma Theyyam. Manakot Amma was an educated lady from the upper caste who stood against the caste-based oppression prevalent during her time. Once, while traveling, the pregnant Manakot Amma drank water from a pot that belonged to an untouchable, according to the system, and enraged her community. She was killed for her deed, but later venerated owing to some cataclysmic occurrences post her death. The Pottan Theyyam, the Kuttichatan Theyyam, Vishnumurti Theyyam, and Manakut Amma Theyyam are performed till date with the same legend. However, these legends fail to portray the enormity of social oppression experienced in the past by the members of the lower caste community. The legends of the Theyyams mentioned could only be seen as an alternate reality imagined by the people of the lower caste communities to escape from the actual social disorder. The legend of Pottantheyam is revolutionary in nature in the sense that it questions the discriminatory practices of the time. However, when given a closer look, the story could only be read as a fiction that stemmed out of the insecurities of the people belonging to the lower strata of the then society. It's their resistance and hope for a better social system that has been brought out in the form of legend and the Theyyam performance. The social context of the time didn't allow the untouchables to cross paths with the people belonging to the upper caste, let alone engage in a debate with the latter. Even the legend is fashioned in a way that it gives Pottan a godly fervor, justifying his attitudes towards Shankaracharya, who was a member of the upper caste. The portrayal of Pottan as an incarnation of Lord Shiva could be a work of a few from the upper caste. T.V. Chandran, in his book Ritual as Ideology, put forward this very assumption that there has been a mixing of Puranic myths within the Theyyam legends. A look into the history of Totem Partigal will reveal that, like any other song during the early centuries, Totem Partigal was transmitted from generation to generation as oral narratives. They were written down only after Malayalam reached its full bloom as a language, that is somewhere around 17th to 18th century AD. The stories of oppression were hence transmitted orally by the people and then performed as Theyyam. The Nambudiris, who over the time gained patronage of the art form, must have tried and overshadowed the whole issue by rewriting the stories in Totem Particle. They are likely to mix Puranic myths into the local legends and lessen the gravity of the problem earlier projected. Roland Barthes' idea that it's in the capacity of the hegemony to manipulate the myths also seconds the position of T.V. Chandran. However, it's not under the scope of this paper to dwell deeper into the interpolation that took place within the Theyyam legends. This paper would concentrate only on the possible angle of reception of these stories and the Theyyam performances by the spectators of the present. It is also imperative to note that the spectators of the Theyyam performances mostly are from the lower caste who are still living in a society where caste system prevails, though in a different predicament compared to the past. The performance of the story of the Pottan Theyyam in the present showcases the past that is by no means accurate in its depiction. The Pottan Theyyam is seen confronting Shankaracharya by the spectators with questions on the evils of the caste system. The spectators who have heard the story of caste oppression from their forefathers find the story amusing and they create for themselves a complicated palimpsest of the past. However, the legend of Kuttichatan Theyyam provides the spectators with a moderately convincing reality of the past. Kuttinchatan was rebellious in nature and showed resistance towards everything related to the upper caste society he was raised in. He displayed everyday resistance like many others from the lower strata of the society, but unlike the others, his resistance was not veiled. His resistance led to his death, and that was precisely the plight of people who dared to resist and exhibit the resistance. They were killed and never venerated like the Kuttichatan. The legend of Kuttichatan displays him in the light of a martyr and a brave heart who fought against the evils of the society. Nevertheless, his worship as a deity by the upper caste Namudiri himself is far from the reality that existed. The legends and the story of Vishnumurti Theyyam and Manakata Theyyam also are closer to the then societal reality owing to the fact that they were both killed for severing the caste boundaries. Through these legends and their performances, distorted images of the past is created in the mind of the spectators. Through the stories of these Theyyams provide an alternate reality through its translation as an intersemiotic performance, the spectators are comforted by it. India is still a caste-driven society and Kerala is no different in this regard. Despite the fact that caste-based oppression has departed the Kerala society, many from the lower caste communities are under the shadow of the past. Ivan Campbell's study of the intergenerational trauma could be used to understand the psychology. The Dalit oppression inflicted a collective multifacious trauma on the people who endured it, and it has been passed through generations. The fabricated realities in the legends of the Pottan Theyyam, Kuttichatan Theyyam, Vishnumurthy Theyyam, and Manakattu Amma Theyyam could be either interpreted as the voice of the Dalit who wanted an alternate reality to escape from the clutches of the caste-based society, or these Theyyams stories could be changed by the people from the upper caste itself to lessen the gravity of the cruelty inflicted by them on the Dalits of the time. Nevertheless, the spectators of the current generation who belong to the Dalit community are pacified by these performances and the alternate reality presented through these performances. Thank you. Sir,
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am. It was such
I think
very beautiful. So you can proceed, ma'am.
Yeah, I think all the paper presenters have presented their papers. So, as the theme of this international virtual conference is, it is related to the cultural diversity of our nation, which is a very important feature of our country, as we say that unity in diversity. So we notice various cultural traditions and various values being followed here. And the concept of this webinar has provided us a glimpse into the diverse cultural values of our nation. And the papers presented here have done justice to the given theme of this international virtual conference. The very first paper that was presented by Evangeline, it was a very interesting and engaging paper that was about the Khasi tribe. A paper talked about the story-making impulse of the man and the creation of Khasi tribe. Then we have a paper by Jeba that was about the values of family. And Sheba in her paper talked about the cultural clashes and cultural hegemony. Here she presented how the minorities are suppressed and other different realities of cultural diversity. Then the last paper, which was presented by Shilpa Ravindran, it was about the caste system in Hindu religion, and it has highlighted how the Shudras or the Dalits were suppressed. Really, when Shilpa was talking about all the legends, it was really very engaging. So I thank and congratulate all the paper presenters for such enlightening and interesting papers. And I thank Mr. Roderick Mario. I'm so sorry for just that taking the wrong name, sir. I'm very thankful to you for inviting me to this session.